Let's go for it.
All right. Well, everyone, to respect everybody's time, I just want to say, number one, thank you for being here. It's close to 80 degrees outside. It's sunny and a light wind. So you could be anywhere outside having fun, but you're here with us today virtually with the Green Task Force. Number one, thank you all for coming. Very excited to hear from Mr. Hannig regarding our Streets for People and our complete streets from DPW. So very exciting today. Glad to see that we have so many people here with us this afternoon. We got 26 people here, and it's all the great things that are going on around the Green Task Force. I know that there's a presentation today, and people are calling in asking for additional presentations by the Green Task Force. Every time the Green Task Force goes somewhere and makes a presentation, people are super impressed and they're asking for more presentations. So this is a great way to spread the word and spread the gospel about sustainability and what we're doing at the Green Task Force. So that's number one, thank you to everybody. And then Natalie or Kerwin, do you want to say anything before we move on to our presentation?
Nothing for me. It looks like Kerwin turned his camera off, so he's on the phone.
All right. Well, Mr. Hannig, thank you for coming today. Looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us about our complete streets and streets for people.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Councilmember Benson. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Fine by me.
Yes, give me one. Yep, give me 1 second.
Of course.
All right, see if that works.
Yes. Let me just move a couple things around so I can still see folks. Make sure you get the full screen. Uh-oh. Can you still see it?
We can.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you. So, well, thank you so much for having me today. My name is James Hannig. I'm the Deputy Director for Complete Streets at the Department of Public Works here at the City of Detroit. I'm very honored to be speaking with you today. I want to make sure I give enough time for discussion, so I'm going to try to go through these slides relatively quickly, but at any point, if you want to stop me or if you want to have me pause a little bit more on any of the slides, just let me know. And hopefully some of this will be repeats, because I hope people aren't completely new to the Streets for People plan, but yeah, I'm excited to share. So without further ado, so the Streets for People plan has been in development since 2019 from a very generous grant from the Department of Transportation and some additional funding to develop really a citywide master transportation plan, which the City of Detroit has not had. So it was very much led by partnership with the City of Detroit, with DPW and my predecessor, Caitlin Marcone-Malloy at the helm, and then also Michigan Department of Transportation and SEMCOG. And then our consultant that was really leading the development of the plan was WSP. And there are sort of three central deliverables that are included with the plan. So a street design guide, which would be really the local Bible for engineers and planners and really anyone to be able to use as the expectation for what streets in Detroit should look like based on surrounding context. And then also a more internally focused project development checklist that would really give engineers and designers and planners kind of a way to make sure that they're approaching design consistently across projects. And then finally, an actual vision, meaty document that sets the vision for transportation mobility for the City of Detroit going forward. The street design guide is final and posted on the city's website. And I can make sure I include a link when I'm done here if I didn't include it in the PowerPoint. Otherwise, I will definitely share it afterward. But it's a great document. I'm going to share a few excerpts this afternoon. The project development checklist is still being finalized, as is the transportation plan. It's really essentially substantially complete with some fantastic feedback from community members and stakeholders throughout the way. We're just working with the administration to get it actually formally adopted. And that's a little bit to be determined in terms of timeline, and I can touch on that in a little bit, but I'm very excited for this to eventually be fully accessible to everyone on the call. So I'll be focusing on sort of the main components of the plan and then giving a pretty high level overview of the street design guide. So the plan itself is divided into sort of four main sections, really establishing where the city of Detroit is going in terms of transportation and mobility, where we are today. So, kind of what has led us to the streets and rights of way and way of getting around that we see every day. Where do we want to go? So what have we heard from community members and from stakeholders in terms of what they would like to see their streets look like, and also how to use them? And then how do we get there? So what are the actions and recommendations and really efforts that can be taken by various stakeholders, and including the Department of Public Works, to make it happen? Oh, did I see a hand raised? Oh, okay, sorry. So there were 5 core values that were established throughout this process as well, and I certainly won't read them to you. And these are available on the website, so if you want to dig into them and see how they were developed and what they say, but really focusing on safety and the safety of pedestrians, kind of first and foremost. Making sure that our streets are contributing to a prosperous economic environment. Making sure that equity and dignity and transparency are reflected in the way we use our streets and get around in the city. Making sure that access is equitable as well, and is that people of varying abilities have the same right and access to these public facilities, right? And then also making sure that the relationship between streets and public places doesn't miss that connection to the way we promote health and live healthy lifestyles and have access to this beautiful environment and riverfront that we live right on. So just making sure that all those components are really reflected in how we're approaching the design and operation and maintenance of our streets. I'm going to highlight just a few things that I'm really particularly proud of when I look at the plan. I'm not proud of the unfortunate situation we find ourselves in with the severity of crashes and traffic violence happening in the city, but I am very excited that it's documented well in the plan, and that we have a roadmap for how to address where the problems are the worst. So just showing on this slide that Detroit ranks surprisingly high in terms of traffic fatalities, especially when you look at pedestrian safety. I see things, just as an example, over the course of 5 years between 2016 and 2020, Gratiot Avenue alone had 855 crashes. I mean, just think of that in terms of how many 747s full of people that is over a 5-year period. I mean, there is substantial opportunity to make our streets safer in the city of Detroit. And you look at this map of our high injury network, this shows where we can be targeting the worst of the worst, and really moving the needle in terms of making these safer places for people. The plan also identifies really looking at a number of different ways of measuring equity and access, and disinvestment and opportunities to make sure that we're putting investments in our streets and in safety in where the need is greatest. So there's a fantastic analysis of just knowing where people are and where they live and how they get around. And then also just access to transit. And I think that comes up often in these circles and conversations, but there's a lot of opportunity to make sure that people can be accessing numbers of community resources that there currently isn't access, but there's opportunity to be, enhancing and, improving our transit services as well. I also wanted to just provide an overview that the plan sort of establishes this hierarchy, or this typology, when it comes to streets and how they're designed. So it identified 8 types of streets, and it doesn't necessarily, even though there's a map, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's prescriptive in terms of the street that's of a certain type has to look a certain way, but it gives us a starting point for how to navigate the trade-offs for different types of streets, depending on how they're intended to be used and what their surrounding context is and what types of neighborhoods they go in. And as I touch into the street design guide, I can give a little bit more tangible examples of what that means. I'm also really excited to say that the plan identified a slow streets network. Some cities call them bicycle boulevards, some call them neighborhood greenways, but the concept is that it's a traffic calm street typically residential streets that already are low volumes, low speed, but where other improvements can be made to really make them places where families and people walking and biking could actually use the street with cars, because it's slow and traffic calmed for long strings of corridors. So often they parallel a more major arterial 1 or 2 blocks off the way, so that it could just be a much more leisurely kind of environment, and still give the priority to people walking and biking. So think of it as the speed hump program that you see today, in terms of all the different speed humps you see throughout the city, but just concerted so that there's wayfinding and there's a certain network to it. Now jumping into the street design guide, I just want to highlight some excerpts and things, and just what you could find, or what you could see if you were digging into the guide itself. So the first chapter is really just an intro, just really establishing how the design guide aligns with the overall transportation plan, but then also how it can be used. So making sure that the connection between how motor vehicles travel and the speed that they travel is directly correlated to the level of safety that people feel on a typical type of street. And then in terms of that process, it just really establishes the life of a project, like how you would navigate and use this guide to make decisions and share alternatives with community members that they can see are addressing the needs that are identified at the beginning of a project. It also establishes and gets into much more detail in terms of those typologies that I mentioned before. So it breaks down each one of these 8 typologies and has basically a 2 to 3 page spread that just shows the different kind of interchangeable components of streets of that type. What are the priorities for a type of street? So, as an example here on this page that's maybe a little fuzzy, it's showing an arterial commercial street, and that really the modal priorities for those type of streets, your starting point should be that it's a high pedestrian focus, pedestrian safety being a high priority because of that commercial nature. There is an opportunity, but maybe a lower opportunity than some other streets for bicycle accommodations, high transit usership, because of the traffic volumes, accommodating cars is still a fairly high priority for those type of streets, but then like a medium priority for trucks. And then each one of those type of street typologies has a page like this that shows you potentially how to navigate that, the starting point for design. And then also, again, you can't see it as well with the fuzziness here, but establishes sort of minimum, desirable, and maximum lane widths for the various types of modes, depending on that type of street. And I would say they all err on the side of trying to be progressive in terms of aligning with best practices like NACTO, if you're familiar. The third chapter of the design guide really focuses on the sidewalk space of streets. So these are just 1 or 2 of just a couple of excerpts from this chapter. But again, kind of like establishes what the various like range of zones recommended for different types of streets are, and how you kind of like could interchange some of those as you're approaching design. I wanted to make special note that it does have a chapter or a sub-chapter, a few pages on green stormwater infrastructure, and I think that's an area that the Department of Public Works in particular could probably focus on implementing and making a higher priority in the near future as we implement this design guide. The fourth chapter is roadways, but it's really focused on the curb to curb width of the street. So even though it shows various types of travel lanes in this excerpt, it does get into much more guidance in terms of the different types of bikeways and different types of separated bike lanes, if you will, and just kind of describes sort of the differences between them and settings for where you may want to use one versus another. And then it also shows other types of treatments to that roadway width, such as right sizing or a road diet, if you've heard of that, just that graphic on the right there. And then the fifth and final chapter of the design guide is really focused on intersections, which is often kind of, I know NACTO had a publication a few years back that basically was titled "Don't Give Up at the Intersections." So there's lots of opportunity to make sure that we don't just end a safe facility as you get to an intersection, but actually focus on those crossing conflict areas as you're going through an intersection, and make sure that those retain that sort of level of protection and safety. So it has a number of recommendations on protected intersections and different types of treatments that you can do to make sure that that's still a priority. With that, I know I was rambling very quickly, but I want to give enough time to really have some discussion. So any thoughts or questions?
That was an excellent presentation. I know we have some questions, and I'm having a difficult time. Can people raise their, there we go. I will start with Todd, then we'll go to Irma, then I see you, Michelle. And I'll keep a list of who's popping up.
Yeah, thanks, James. I had a question about truck routes. We've been discussing that a lot in Southwest Detroit and the Lower East Side. Is that included in the master transportation plan that's coming out?
Yeah, it does. It does not include a route map, if you will, or something that prescribes what are truck routes and what are not. But it does have recommendations and guidance on how to approach sort of the trade-offs and conflict between different types of modes, and how different ways and actions for making sure that most vulnerable users are prioritized, to some degree over truck movements. So I would say that there are definitely some threads to pull on there for making sure that our streets, our interpretation of complete streets prioritizes our most vulnerable people over trucks, but doesn't discard the fact that truck needs are still part of what needs to be accommodated in the public right away.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that. Oh, I know, Todd, were you finished? Sorry. But just following up, we just had an instance here in Detroit. I actually had a different question on green infrastructure, but Todd, you made me think about this, where there was an asphalt plant being proposed for Northwest Detroit. And one of the major issues we had with this proposal was that 100 asphalt plant trucks, 100 trucks would have been traveling down a residential road or very close to it every day. And that's just all kind of wrong. And, and so, fortunately the city, BC, the planning department and the Board of Zoning Appeals saw that this was not a good idea and denied the permit. But there really ought to be some consideration to that. It shouldn't even have been a consideration, right? That this company would be able to suggest that as an option, as a possibility. So this is just to Todd's question. We like commerce. We understand the importance of that, but it has to be from the sustainability perspective. It can't just be the economy. And I know that you're saying the same thing, but we really have to put people first in our environment.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think it really speaks to often that disconnect between land use planning and zoning and the way that we also design and plan for our streets, having sometimes very wide disconnects. So I think that's something that is improving at the city of Detroit, but I'm sure there's much room for improvement to make sure that you don't have to be the watchdog to catch those things.
Yeah, thank you. I'll get back in queue to ask my other question.
All right, Michelle. And don't forget to raise your hand if you have questions.
Good afternoon. James, wonderful presentation. I just would like to know, how does Complete Streets, how are they funded? So is it just money from the city? Do they partner with the county? Do we get federal dollars? How are Complete Streets funded? Where does the dollars come from?
Well, that is an excellent question. Thank you, Michelle. So the city of Detroit's a little bit of an inflection point right now. We're coming out of a multi-year street bonding fund where, obviously a substantial amount of city bond funding was used to construct these streetscape projects that you're probably aware of. And it was to the tune of $80 million, which was substantial for being able to really make a dent in a few specific commercial corridors to really move the needle on the way streets look and how they serve the surrounding, commercial corridors. But that funding source is coming to an end currently. So we're kind of pivoting into, what the next phase of that streetscape program is going to look like. And it's probably going to be a lot more competitive. We'll be seeking a lot of federal and state funding to try to continue that program in the way it kind of looks. But I think there's also an opportunity to really think of complete streets not as just a type of project, but as a mentality for how streets are designed and how they're operated. So making sure that these same kind of principles and opportunities to make streets safer and slower, as appropriate, are being included when a street's being repaved and when it's being restriped, when the pavement markings are changed. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to really find some efficiencies and make sure that this is a mentality that we undertake as a city and as a department kind of comprehensively. So,
And my last question, is it a possibility to do some small pilots of traffic calming throughout the city in different places?
I think there is. We don't have a program necessarily funded yet for even the 2023 budget, but we do have our traffic calming program, the speed hump program, which the number of requests has been starting to decrease. So that could be a potential funding source. And then there are these competitive grants that I mentioned that like Transportation Alternatives Program, where it very much aligns with, I think, the goals of what you're saying, and where we can pilot with more cost-effective materials and try to really have a wider impact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Irma, don't forget to raise your hand if you have questions. Now's the time.
Thank you, Councilman. So, I chair the Water Committee. And so one of our major, along with the Transportation Committee of the Green Task Force, we're really interested in green streets, complete green streets. And it almost sounded like you mentioned GSI, like it was thrown in as an afterthought. I'm sure that's not what you were saying, but it almost sounded that way. And we have last year to point to, right, in terms of flooding, street flooding, excessive stormwater, excessive rain. And streets are really major conduits of this stormwater, right? And so it's also a problem, but it's also potentially a solution if we're capturing that stormwater off of the streets. And I just think opportunity galore to marry the two things, both, complete streets and green, so that it's a win-win-win, really. So, I mean, what's the potential? Is there a holdup? We're talking to the councilman about maybe, some kind of a rule, but, what do you feel is the problem with that? This is not like just the priority at the city.
Well, how much time do you have? No, that's a great question.
All the time in the world.
I don't want to use this as an excuse, but I think being new to the city, I just started in January. It's given me both some insight into what the landscape is, but I'm also will admit that I'm still learning a little bit of the history of green stormwater infrastructure at the city of Detroit. And I'll admit, one of the fellow members here today, Alex Novak, has been incredibly helpful and informative for helping me learn. I mean, not to dodge around it, I think it is hard for folks to see it as a priority sometimes. And I think it's just because it hasn't been standard practice for long enough. And that's maybe too easy an answer, but I think it needs to be identified earlier in the project development process as a priority and as a goal of the project, just as much as safety and economic development and the other, kind of cornerstones that we're trying to accomplish with these public spaces. And I think just some work needs to be done there to really help people see that. But I also want to say there are examples, and there are even these streetscape projects, there are examples we can point to now for proof of concept. And honestly, I'll just kind of end with saying that maintenance is a real struggle and consideration, and it's partly used as a little bit of a crutch, but it is true. Like if we don't set up for ongoing maintenance afterward, things don't look well or don't look good, and they don't operate well. So I think just making sure that, you know, within our grouped budgets and opportunities, that needs to be a priority too. And it's hard because it's not as cool and attractive as some of the other elements of a project, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is. I've heard that also, you know, who's going to maintain it? But, you know, green infrastructure is infrastructure. It's an asset. It's not just, you know, right. It has a purpose. And so just like we clean the gutters and clean out the sewers, and, you know, it's infrastructure the same as other infrastructure. And I think too often we're minimizing the value. So I look forward to seeing more of it, and where it becomes a practice, a norm, instead of the exception. And thank you for any help you can do along that line.
Absolutely.
All right, and then Todd, and then we'll go to Alex.
I was going to defer to Alex since she might be tagging on to the discussion, but I did have a question about maintenance. You know, that's one of the biggest things I hear from bicyclists, is the amount of glass and debris on the streets. And so it seems like some of the designs that get built for the bike lanes, like the Livernois ones where they're separated more from the road, seem to require less maintenance. Has that been a consideration in the design guide? Can Detroit build bike lanes and sidewalks that require less maintenance?
I don't believe it was maybe tackled as head-on as you're saying, and as it probably could have been, but it's definitely a consideration. And I know it's something we're very actively pursuing now in terms of how we can bolster and have a more established ongoing maintenance program. And what you're saying, Todd, is true. Like I think certain types of designs are easier to maintain than others, and it's that trade-off of that upfront capital cost versus, you know, the ongoing maintenance cost. And really we should be doing sort of life cycle cost analysis to actually capture and identify those costs, but that's neither here nor there, I guess.
All right, Alex.
Thank you. Yeah, James, thanks for sharing more about this plan. I'm excited to see the actual document and dig through it, but the design guide has been really interesting to see, and I'm excited to see it hopefully be implemented as soon as possible, or start to be implemented as soon as possible. And thanks, Irma, for bringing up stormwater. Of course, I know it's a thing we talk about all the time. We care the most about, because it really does impact the quality of life for everyone across the city. And so I'm kind of curious, James. You know, you played the card of being new, valid. I hear you. But you also come from a city that has a really great GSI program, Milwaukee. The region has a good GSI program. The city, their DPW works with their metropolitan sewer district to do GSI in streets. And I'm not sure how involved you were with those specific projects, but I'm curious if there are things that you're bringing from that experience in Milwaukee that you might be able to apply to the work in Detroit, and specifically with regards to maintenance, because Milwaukee is often used as an example of best practice for how to structure maintenance programs, where the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District has like a nonprofit arm that partners with community groups to you know, build workforce development capacity, green collar job capacity to do the maintenance across the city and across the region. So I'm curious if you see any opportunities to do some of that, or other lessons learned to bring to Detroit.
Well, thank you. Yes, I definitely take that with me every day. Despite maybe being held up as a sterling example of it working well. A lot of those same challenges, especially for getting it included on multimodal type projects, was very similar. Around the time I left, I was also managing a project for basically a slow street in Milwaukee, where we were trying to incorporate green infrastructure into the design, and I was hitting a lot of walls, and despite support from the sewage district. So it's not unique in some ways as well. But yeah, I think I'm constantly looking for opportunities to make this a higher priority. It's just part of it is a little bit structural in that we're just not set up to do it easily currently, and I think maybe there's some opportunities to have conversations around I guess different structural and resources that could be kind of explored to make it easier.
All right, any other hands?
Yeah, I just
that
want to
it?
say for sure, you know,
Irma, go
I mean,
ahead.
just like Milwaukee, you know, Detroit, we're Great Lake cities, right? And we all love our lakes, our freshwater resource that no one else in the world has. And stormwater leads to combined sewer overflows. So I feel like there ought to be a way to tap into some of that money, clean water money to, GLRI, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funds or something, because sewage is flowing from our pipes into our water. And so, just some real brainstorming on, how to make that, how to connect these dots. So, yeah. So we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
James, this has been a great presentation. I also just want to add, with last summer's impact, and we've had heavy rain over the last 4 or 5 years that have really had some significant flooding within the region, and especially in Detroit. You have a great opportunity to leverage that fresh experience in the minds of Detroiters and say, hey, this is a great way that we can beautify our streets, we can make our streets safer, and we can also help to keep stormwater out of your basements and keep flooding clean, keep flooding out of our neighborhoods. And so I would not hesitate to utilize that, and then educate the populace and let them become your mouthpiece and your bullhorn around green infrastructure. What GSI can help keep water out of my basement during a heavy rain? How does that work? Let them, then that makes your job easier, and it won't be such a heavy lift when you go after funding. Just somebody who walks around KMAC on a regular basis. So just my suggestion of a layperson over here. While you have James here, Joel.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you.
Hey, thanks, James. Appreciate it. I'm curious, and I don't know, there's probably not enough data, but I'm curious, was there enough crash data and crash severity data to do any kind of an analysis in terms of looking at the protective value of the different kinds of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure as we've installed it?
That is a great question. There is substantial data that we can certainly and do look at to see how trends are changing, but unfortunately there's so much that's underreported or not reported that it is a little hard to capture, especially when you look at instances of near misses for people walking and people biking, that it's an accurate measure of what's actually happening out there in terms of potential incidents. But unfortunately, speed has only gone up during the pandemic, and the severity of crashes appears to be going up as well. So I'm not sure we're trending in the right direction, Joel.
Yeah, I know we're not, unfortunately, but okay, thanks.
All right, Myra, I see your hand is up.
Hi, yes, I'm traveling in the car, but I have a quick question regarding stormwater runoff. Are there studies that tell us how much we need in order to prevent some of the stormwater, like so many square miles of much water. So that's one question that I had. And then the other one, just wondering in terms of prioritizing, are we also looking at this picture, like considering also the parks that are also being renovated and having complete streets lead up to those parks, or then also the greenways? So just both of those things.
Yeah, you broke up there a couple times, but if I got the question correctly, it's, are there ways to measure the impact or capture that's needed? Yes, there are. If that's correct. I don't know them off the top of my head, I will admit, but I know that sometimes we do get pushback as to what degree that can be captured on streets, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And then to the second question, yes, we are continually partnering with the General Services Department and our county partners to make sure that we're exploring these opportunities in parks. In fact, a lot of times they're coming to DPW for to ask us for their feedback because they're taking such a leadership role. So, but sometimes things aren't on our jurisdiction for DPW, so it makes it a little more challenging. But yeah, I think there's a lot of partnership already happening, and I think that's only the stepping stone for where we can go from here.
Okay, thank you. I think so. I hope I can that you can hear me. So I think it was more so, I want to make sure that we're not going to give residents too much of a message of, when we do this, it's going to help with the flooding in your basement, because it's going to take quite a bit. And so I'm just wondering, do we know how much it will take before we would actually start to see a change in terms of the flooding in our basements?
I can speak a little bit to that, though there's probably other people on this call who can maybe even speak better, but I will say green infrastructure alone, just doing like bioswales and rain gardens, will not take the amount of volume out of the system that would prevent flooding. But if we're doing those types of projects with significant underground storage, so like the Oakman Boulevard project that DWSD did, it's a lovely green street. You know, it has a huge bioswale, but there's also a huge storage tank underground, so it can capture more volume than just what that basin and plants can take. And so, you know, citywide streets cover like 25% of our, or 27% of our impervious surfaces. And so that's just a fraction of what stormwater is running off of. So certainly GSI paired with storage, underground infrastructure, but also, you know, capturing beyond the streets. Obviously, we have parking lots and churches and schools and properties that can also be opportunities for catchment.
All right, Megan, and then we'll go to Irma, and then Breathe Free.
Hi, thank you. Speaking of partnerships and the different jurisdictions, obviously a lot of Detroit's biggest roads are MDOT properties. When you talk about Woodward, Gratiot, Michigan, and sometimes that's where you have the biggest problems of speeding and crashes and such. I'm curious how much partnership you're getting with the state, with MDOT, on improving the safety of roads like that. I know that Ferndale and Pleasant Ridge had to fight for years to get a road diet on Woodward, and then people slow down there, and then they zoom through on 6 and 7 miles. So yeah, what more could MDOT be doing to help in this respect?
Yeah, great question. I would say the partnerships are pretty strong, and I think the collaboration and willingness to find solutions is it's working. I shouldn't say maybe it's working, but it's moving in a positive direction. And I think, you know, I find since coming here that a lot of the interactions I have with MDOT staff in particular are positive, and they care a lot about making streets safer and better for everyone. I think sometimes maybe the methods and whose standards to use maybe are up for debate and kind of sometimes get a little bit of tension. But I think the thing that is maybe one of the more frustrating aspects is the timelines that it takes. So, you know, MDOT has its processes and sort of the strings attached to their funding that have to be followed. And that often means that we can't act as quickly to address what we know are these immediate safety concerns that are, you know, can be addressed, should be addressed now. So that's the tough part. And I think the more that we see guidance from the U.S. Department of Transportation that tries to help local jurisdictions like Detroit be more nimble to implement things into the ground like faster than maybe what is typically taking. I think we're trying as much as we can to set ourselves up to tap into those funding sources.
That's great. And I'd love to, maybe I can follow up offline. I'm looking at ways, what are things that MDOT can do to be a more positive partner for Southeast Michigan when it comes to transit and safe streets and such. So if there are changes that the governor could be recommending, et cetera, I'd love to explore those with you. So thanks for all your work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Irma?
I just wanted to follow up. Green infrastructure is not meant to be a panacea at all, but there are a couple key things, and that is it's stormwater management. That's its purpose, but it has many other co-benefits that are really important. I just heard that the asthma hospitalization rate in Detroit for children is higher than it's ever been. I don't quote me, but that's what I remember. That's what I heard, which is shocking and alarming and awful. And so green infrastructure has the benefit also of helping with air quality. We also have these hotter days, a lot of senior citizens like Irma who live in old houses without air conditioning. And so I just planted a tree out back last year, and I'm getting ready to plant some more, so, it has all these other benefits. So I just want to keep that in mind. But also gray infrastructure hasn't been a panacea. The city spent $2 billion on gray retention treatment basins and facilities, and we still have flood in the stormwater in the street and crap in the basement and crap in the water. So it's a yes and. It's really a yes and. It's like all things, all people, all options, all possibilities. And then, of course, climate change. So just wanted to make that point.
All right, Breathe Free.
Yeah, thank you. This is KT Andreski with Breathe Free Detroit. And I'm sorry I came in a little late, so I hope this question is still relevant, but because we were talking about wastewater and stormwater and flooding, I'm just wondering if there's any consideration for factories and industry and like places like US Ecology that's in my neighborhood that dump into our stormwater systems, all types of chemicals. And these chemicals aren't always tested for when they're being treated and come back into our drinking water. And it's a huge problem. Maybe we can try to regulate that so that it goes into its own system, so that it's totally redirected outside of our drinking water. Because when there's flooding in my neighborhood, we don't just worry about the waste water coming into our basement. We're worried about toxic industrial waste water from US Ecology also coming into our basements, which is pretty disgusting and threatening to a lot of families here. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any additional hands. James, I think you outlast everybody's questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So going once, going twice. Any additional questions for James while we have him here? Well, James, number one, I just want to say thank you very much for coming today and giving this great presentation. And I know we just had a conversation yesterday with Irma and my team and a number of others who are really, Todd Scott, interested in green stormwater infrastructure. So just looking forward to having more conversations. I had a brief conversation with Gary Brown yesterday about this and green alleys. So looking forward to having more conversations behind that and hopefully have an ordinance relatively soon to address that. All right,
Remember.
Natalie.